Share with me you going from being an Army Ranger to a biotech CEO. What was the hardest internal shift that you had to make between the battlefield and the boardroom?
The principles that were developed in me through my Army service were applicable at various levels in my career in corporate America.
Welcome back to the Primal Reset Podcast. Today, we're joined by David Esposito, the CEO of ONL Therapeutics and a former U.S. Army Ranger turned biotech leader. David has led multiple life science companies and is currently pioneering breakthrough therapies to prevent vision loss through neuroprotection and retinal cell death prevention. David, it is a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the show.
Eliot, thanks for having me. Excited to be on. It's great work you're doing in the marketplace, highlighting some things, and pleasure to be on your program.
Well, I appreciate the kind words. Share with me you going from being an Army Ranger to a biotech CEO. What was the hardest internal shift that you had to make between the battlefield and the boardroom?
So it's been a long journey, a little bit over 30 plus years or so in making that transition. I was in active duty with the 101st Airborne Division as an infantry platoon leader. Then I moved off of active duty and started off my career with a large pharma company as a sales rep. So I think in that initial change, one of the most dramatic things was you go from a pretty regimented environment where you're working collectively together as a team and you pretty much know where to show up, what to wear and how to get going, to being a sales rep driving around in a car by yourself, kind of hunting down doctors and driving business that way. So you go from a big crowd to, driving a Ford Taurus all over the place to try to find doctors. That initial transition of just being out on your own was a big fundamental shift. But I think, the principles that were developed in me through my Army service were applicable at various levels in my career in corporate America. Those general principles of setting the example, doing the hard work, encouraging others, being useful to the team, all of those, really serving a calling larger than yourself. Those kind of foundational principles certainly applicable in all walks of life, the military and my job today. I think it's just a matter of how you may apply those principles, maybe slightly different.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a interesting jump to see from battlefield into sales rep and driving even further into becoming a CEO. Most biotech founders lead with science and you really lead with mission. So why do you think mission first founders win more in the long?
I think it's always, this is hard work regardless in biotech and scientific innovation. And I think it does obviously start with a foundation of science. You have to apply scientific principles to solve a problem. So I think that's an important foundational element, but ultimately it's the calling or the direction of the team and that technology that is what really sustains the energy of the team and sustains the interest in investors. We're a privately held company, venture capital invested. So that calling or direction that you're headed, like in ONL Therapeutics, we've got a vision to help patients see the future. So that is really a guiding North Star for us that in a very similar scenario of my military upbringing and then ultimately into a biotech environment, the new data point is a reason to reassess the plan. So you go into a battle with a plan, you go into running a biotech company with a plan and technology, but the science and the data points may cause you to rethink that base case or that plan. And so the ability to adjust on your feet, to encourage and motivate a team focus is critically important. And that point about, what's the direction, the mission, the long-term vision of the company is a very helpful rallying point in times of uncertainty when the data points don't always come in as they should, or the battlefield doesn't always look the same as you were planning for that mission. So I think those longer term direction on The day-to-day mission for us developing first-in-class therapeutics to protect the vision of patients with retinal disease ties to long-term steps of our vision. And I think those are critically important to sustain the energy and direction, focus of the team, because inevitably there'll be twists and turns in that journey of that long, slow march to that vision.
And you've succeeded so many times in the past and still are, especially with ONL. And the science behind everything is definitely backing up that mission that you guys have to really help people prevent their eye loss and retinal loss and all of the prevention for eyes as well. Would you say that you believe that most current treatments for retinal disease are just kind of glorified symptom managers and not real solutions?
It's a great question. The eye disease, retinal disease specifically, is very complicated. There are millions of patients suffering from these conditions like age-related macular degeneration, wet or dry forms of those, glaucoma as well. I think they're all current therapies in the market are really designed to slow the loss of vision, slow the loss of the death of those retinal cells, which ultimately support transducing light to your brain to ultimately create the vision that we see. So those therapies are designed to do that. We're in the category of slowing that loss as well. There are some up and coming therapies that, when you think about gene therapies or some cell therapies to actually not regenerate cells, but repurpose cells back to functionality, is an important aspect too. I think the science is complicated and these are all in stages. So I think for the most part, some of these diseases still are large unmet needs, which would say we need new therapeutics like what we're working on at ONL and others to do better in preventing that vision loss, which, you talk to most people, that is one of the top fears in people's mind as they age, is the ability to lose sight while they still have function within their body. And so we're working hard, as I know many are, to try to prevent that vision loss.
And based on our talk kind of before this as well, it definitely seems like you guys are on the correct path to get there.
These are long, tough journeys, but you're exactly right. I think we need the innovation to move the field forward, and that's where a lot of us find that purpose in doing that work.
And would you say that you believe saying that age-related blindness or eye problems is inevitable? Would you say that's a lazy diagnosis?
No, it's not a bad point. I mean, they're age related for a reason. It kind of eventually will hopefully live long enough to kind of see those problems. I think I'm not a scientist by training or a physician, but certainly all body parts over time have a tendency to wear out. Eyes are no different that way. Some of them, when you think about comorbid conditions like diabetes or heavy smokers, they have a tendency to be some of those precursors that eventually develop into some of these eye conditions that perhaps for maybe a healthy person without those comorbidities may preserve their vision longer. But they're certainly, we all live long enough, we'll get some of these. And that's why, hope for folks like you, encouraging folks like me to kind of move the innovation forward, that by the time we all get in that age bracket, we'd kind of like to have a few of these on the market.
Well, I definitely think we will see a couple from at least ONL Therapeutics of some of more of a prevention side of things to make sure that my generation and future generations will also at least have the vision loss prolonged throughout a long, healthy lifetime. Why would you say smoking and diabetes? I'm kind of curious about that. What does those affect the eye vision?
Yeah, well, it's like a lot of these conditions, call it the obesity epidemic that, principally trips into a lot of adult oriented or type 2 diabetes. Smoking has a whole lot of challenging effects on the body, not just the eyes. I mean, I think these are some of the conditions that induce additional stress in the body in additional specific cells of the body, specifically retinal cells. And so those conditions, just like they do in other parts of the body, whether it's kidney disease due to diabetes, certainly respiratory conditions due to smoking, have a very similar effect to cells in the eye. And so there are of many of those comorbid conditions that you could say very similar exacerbate heart disease and these other conditions. It's no different in eye disease. And I think um, part of the importance for all of us is obviously trying to manage a lifestyle that puts those at rest or certainly delays the onset of some of those. But certainly in eye conditions is very prevalent around diabetics to think about getting routine eye exams because they can be early precursors to certainly things like glaucoma for sure, and age-related macular degeneration. It's just part of the basket. You mentioned something earlier about just prevention of eye conditions. I mean, I think that's where a lot of times the overall, I know in your podcast and a lot of the people you have on think about the ways to prevent some of these things and how to live a healthier lifestyle and wellness. Unfortunately, our system isn't always really geared to that. It's more geared towards dealing with the problems. But I think all of these conditions with a bit of prevention out in front on lifestyle and fitness, all the things that you talk about on this podcast are super helpful to slow the progression of some of these diseases. Diseases are no different than those others.
And we always say a carrot a day helps eye vision. What's your take on that?
Well,
Complete myth?
yeah, no, it depends on what else you have with the carrot, right? So I think, the apple a day keeps the doctor away, carrots for vision. So I'm a believer in all of that, Eliot, for sure. I think myself included, it's what you stack onto that healthy lifestyle choice that might create the problems. But I'd say, yes, continue to eat carrots. That'd be a good thing.
All right. Well, don't poke yourself with a carrot, but eat them and try to have a healthy, balanced diet along with it as well.
That's a good idea. Yep. Try not to although, yeah, I won't say it. Try not to add in too many pizzas, but it's always good to have a good pizza.
So, what's one breakthrough that we can see in neuroprotection that you think the public will see kind of as a standard care within the next 10, 20 years?
That's a great question, Eliot. So, I mean, and that's what we feel like we're on the forward edge of a new frontier that's very exciting around neuroprotection. So you or your audience may be familiar with the condition of glaucoma. The vast majority of those treatments are to lower intraocular pressure, so the pressure inside your eye, which ultimately damages some cells of the retina, ganglion cells, and then back towards the optic nerve. So in what we've seen in our early human trials with ONL 1204, which is our lead compound that blocks a specific pathway that induces cell death in these like glaucoma. Our drug blocks that pathway. What that really can do then is, regardless of conditions like intraocular pressure, you want to manage that pressure down, no doubt about it. And these current therapies do that. But the potential to actually protect those cells on a much longer term to be able to improve or at least slow the progression of somebody's visual field loss. So in glaucoma is really, you lose peripheral vision, it narrows your field of view. That in neuroprotection and drugs like ONL 1204, we're showing the slowing the progression of that visual field loss, which takes place regardless of the pressure in the eye, at least we saw in our early trials. So that innovative frontier is the foundational treatment to lower intraocular pressures shouldn't change and should be a mainstay of therapy. But a drug like ONL 1204 could actually slow the progression of visual field loss, which would be really fantastic for patients out there. So that's what I think the next 5 to 10 years holds on neuroprotection. We're not the only ones kind of working in that field, but we certainly feel we're one of the front runners, and we're working to get in further into glaucoma development.
You've mentioned fast pathway to me beforehand as well, which very few outside of this field quite understand. Can you break it down to me in a quick 60 seconds?
So on the surface of cells throughout the body, but I'll talk about retinal cells, they react to stress or inflammation or disease. So in the eye, things like glaucoma or age or wet related age or dry or wet related, age-related macular degeneration creates stress in the eye. That stress triggers an immune response, which activates that FAST receptor. So FAST is a receptor on retinal cells. And when that immune cell activates that FAST receptor, it triggers the death of that retinal cell. So the body's reaction to that stress is, let me try to protect these cells and trigger a death pathway. So what our drug does is actually block that FAST receptor from being activated. So in conditions of stress, the stress in the eye, because our drug's blocking that death signaling, cell does not know it should be ready to die because of that stress. And so the FAST pathway is a core common pathophysiologic response to stress, which triggers the death of that cell. Our drug blocks that. And so that's why across all of these eye conditions, our drug could have a potential benefit because it will block the death signaling of that cell, keep it alive in those stressful situations. Maybe that was a little over 60 seconds, but hopefully Eliot did a half decent job of explaining the pathway.
No, absolutely. It's always curious to know kind of the science behind everything and the more detailed version. And when we talk about eyes, there's so many things that people don't really understand. We just think we need to get our eyes checked, and based on 2020 or 2025 or whatever that number might look like, we need glasses or we don't need glasses. And to kind of find out the science behind all of it, I think is creating some of that awareness so we can see in the future marketplace ONL and think, hey, these people are actually helping because of, and then we fill in the rest because we've learned it now.
Eliot, one other point may be of just general knowledge as well. So retinal cells don't regenerate like skin cells. They're always regenerating. Retinal cells, you have what you have. And so the importance of preventing damage to those cells and the death of those cells is critical because you're just on a declining number of those cells over time. And so that's a big difference too in combating some of these other disease states. You want to get after it early and prevent the death of those because we're not regrowing anymore. We're not regenerating new retinal cells. And that's an important point of differentiation in eye disease than perhaps, skin conditions and other things like that.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that information with us. And it's definitely crucial to understand before we even go to our eye doctors or even start seeing these therapies and just seeing all the ads for them and not quite understanding what they're for. To the point, what you have dealt with, especially in the biotech industry, everything has to get approved by the FDA. And that's kind of their stamp of approval, stamp of trust. I know you've mentioned trust isn't earned after that approval, but it's built years before in the story that you're telling. How do you build belief without proof?
Well, that's a great question. So, I think in the beginning, you certainly want a strong foundational scientific concept that can potentially meet a large unmet need. So I think principally that trust building episode starts with a real classification of the problem you're trying to solve. We're not trying to boil the ocean. We're focused on a specific disease state so that trust and credibility comes to say, hey, we feel like we have a good understanding of this disease state. We have a really good understanding of what potentially could help prevent that disease or target, in our case, a therapeutic target like a FAST receptor. So I think that starts that. And then I think the credibility and trust is built, certainly in our journey. We've been in human trials now a little bit over 5 years, that with every data point, that becomes really transparent data, fully disclosing of the data, the pluses and the minuses, begin to build a level of trust and credibility in the marketplace. You hear a lot of things or can read about different scientific endeavors and maybe people not fully disclosing the science or not describing. And I think to your point, we're in the life-saving or life-protecting business, eye vision protecting business. This is serious stuff. We want to make sure we're progressing with the right level of transparency in our data, accuracy in our data. This stuff is complicated. And I think over time that's built well. And in the US and most countries of the world regulatory process, that's why you have stages of development, phase 1 trials, phase 2, phase 3, ultimately to gain approval. It's geared up to really leverage the statistical power of large numbers to prove how safe and effective a drug is, and a really good system of checks and balances in that. But you read about it today, some early stage companies, also late commercial stage companies that sometimes misstep on how they communicate the things. And that's a hard one to overcome when it happens in the marketplace. We show up every work today to kind of put a foot forward with regards to the right data, communicate it effectively, and see where we end up. Stuff is tough work, and not all of it succeeds. That's the reality of it as well. Even with, you're nice to highlight some successful ventures or so that I've had. I've taken a few companies into bankruptcy or control, wind down, whatever you want to call it. The science is tough, but even in those situations, it moves the science forward so that somebody with another technology may be able to pick up and run with it. And that's the exciting part about the innovation, at least that we try to drive here in the US.
Absolutely. And I mean, we could even take it back into creating the light bulb. And okay, Thomas Edison created the first light bulb, and he created that pathway. And the saying is he failed, I believe it was 999 times,
Something like that.
beforehand. But we're not defined by our failures, we're defined by our successes. And with the amount of failures is where we'll create that success. So, I mean, now we have LEDs. You can see them almost in my picture frame behind me as well. So we've really redefined the light bulb. It's the same thing, I think, in this aspect as well.
Even the definition of failures. Yep, some of them you could say failing in these companies that I wound down, failures. But you kind of learn and grow through it, both professionally and the technology of the science. If you apply those learnings forwards, in many ways, you're just stepping stones along the pathway to progress.
Absolutely. What's the first step someone could take today into prolonging their eye care or their eye health?
It's a great one. Maybe a step 1 and maybe a step 1A, I guess. I think one is to actually be intentional about caring for their eyes. We take a lot of things for granted when we're healthy. You're a healthy guy, right? For the most part. And that way too, you take a lot for granted when you're healthy. That saying, what is it? The healthy guy has 1,000 wishes. The sick guy just has one, So if we took a little bit more of an intentional effort of awareness of our vision and eye health would be great. And the 1A or 1B to that step would be, you should go for your routine eye exams. Really should. It's not just because, an old guy like me needs glasses to be able to see, just that routine annual care, because some of these disease states can get picked up early. But most of us kind of wander around until we have a real problem. So I think those steps of one, be intentional about the health of your eyes. Don't take them for granted. But the next click along that one is to get your annual checkup is the right thing to do.
Great advice. We only have one set of eyes. They don't regenerate, like you mentioned. David, I appreciate you coming on today. It was a pleasure speaking with you. If there's anyone out there that wants to learn more, ONL Therapeutics is the next upcoming thing within the next couple of years, getting FDA approved soon. Go check out their website. I'll have it in the description below. And also check out David on LinkedIn. He's got thousands and thousands of followers, shares some great information out there. If you want to talk to him, reach out to him. Learn a little bit more about eye health and seeing what you can do today to really start preventing that vision loss for the future. David, pleasure to have you. We'll have to do this again soon.
Eliot, thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute pleasure, and certainly love to stay in touch, and glad for your audience to reach out to me or the team. We're glad to have the conversation. Thanks so much.